I'd like to start this video by saying that I have a Blue Sky account, so if you have Blue Sky, feel free to follow me. Greetings and welcome back to the final part of the video where I review every Best Picture winner. Yes, we're finally here. And good news if you only like to watch movies from the 21st century, because that's all I'm gonna talk about. But like seriously, this is the decade I'm most familiar with. Well, not decade, this is the era I'm most familiar with because I grew up here and we're currently in here, so yeah. But before we begin my reviews, let's go through everyone's favorite part of these, the history lessons. You see, I mentioned last video that the 90s were a happy time, but the world kind of forever changed on September 11th, 2001. Our movies just kind of, every now and then a feel-good blockbuster would release, but mostly these films that came out were just kind of sad, very real though, sort of representative of the death of the American dream. A lot like the 1970s, if you ask me. And now, let's get in. The only Oscar to go to Ridley Scott, who is a legendary director in my book. I really enjoyed this film. It had great themes, production design, and Hans Zimmer cooked with a phenomenal soundtrack. I know it's not very historically accurate, but it's still so beautiful looking and has an amazing story. The action sequences were great, and my favorite performances were from Djimon Hounsou, Joaquin Phoenix, and Oliver Reed. I thought it would be appropriate to watch since a sequel is coming out real soon, but yeah, definitely one of Scott's best films, period. This movie is okay, but it's also kind of a bore to go through if I'm gonna be honest. I liked how it dealt with schizophrenia, and I'm glad they didn't romanticize it. I also like how they revealed it partway through the movie rather than dropping it like a bomb at the end. But, I don't know, this isn't the movie I'd go see in theaters if I had a chance.
He had it coming, he had it coming, he only had himself to blame.
So, I'm a huge sucker for musicals. Good musicals, that being, of course. And this movie was freaking fantastic. I haven't seen a normal performance of Chicago, but there's definitely a reason why it's one of the most iconic musicals of all time. I loved the style of how they switched between the film set and the stage and how they used dance choreography to tell the story. All three main actors were amazing as their respective roles, with Catherine Zeta-Jones definitely stealing the show in my opinion. But yeah, perhaps not the best film of the year, but a lot of fun. And probably the sexual awakening of a lot of women. This is one of my favorite movies of all time. Not just this movie, but the trilogy as a whole. And even though the first two are some of my favorites, I didn't mention them for the last 2 years because I definitely think this award is a credit to the entire trilogy, but Return is my favorite of the trilogy because, well, it wraps up the story so perfectly. The action is amazing, and the visual effects are some of the best I've ever seen in a movie. The music is godly, the acting is amazing, and overall, this is the prime example I would give for a perfect film. Everything has a purpose, and the themes are ones that I stand by. This movie tells me that I can be better than I already am, and that's why it might be my favorite Best Picture winner. And we have the final film to be among the trio of most Academy Award winners. Another film by Clint Eastwood, and I think I liked this one better. It starts off as sort of an underdog story, but then just becomes soul-destroying. Eastwood, Swank, and Freeman were all amazing as their characters, and the soundtrack was so pretty. Who wrote it? Wait, he could do music too? Yeah, this one was really depressing as well. Now, this is definitely the most controversial Best Picture winner, and yeah, there's so much wrong with this film. The fact that it really comes off as pretentious Oscar bait, the fact that it feels like a privileged person's attempt to explain why racism is bad, the fact that the dialogue is some of the worst I've heard in any film, the fact that there is some extremely harmful stuff in this, like, gosh. If you want to watch a movie called Crash, watch the one by David Cronenberg from 1996. Brokeback Mountain should have won this year, mainly because it's actually a good movie. I guess the Academy didn't want an LGBTQ+ film to take the award this time around, and it's really shameful that much of the talent in this film was horribly wasted. The only Best Picture winner to be directed by Martin Scorsese. And I'd say it's probably one of his best films he's made. The suspense that the film puts you through just feels so real. The film brings in a whole bunch of unexpected twists and turns that are filmed in such an expert way that helps make it feel shocking. The performances are top tier, with the standout role definitely being Jack Nicholson. And it's a fantastic crime drama that represents that sort of world in a post-9/11 world. My favorite character was Queenan, but probably because I'm a huge fan of Martin Sheen. But yeah, this is what I would consider one of my favorite films of all time. Man, this film is amazing. But it's also a really tough watch. Javier Bardem probably plays one of the most chilling characters I've ever seen in a film. Heck, psychologists have said he's the most accurate portrayal of a psychopath in cinema. It truly feels like he never looks at you, but rather through you. Josh Brolin, Kelly MacDonald, and Tommy Lee Jones were all freaking amazing too. Also, I keep forgetting that the Coen brothers made this one, because usually their films have a sense of lightheartedness, but this is probably their most nihilistic film. But most likely one of my favorite Best Picture winners of all time. And of course, the kitty cameos. It's strange, because I hear this movie was pretty popular upon its release, but now it seems it's faded into obscurity. But I find that pretty shameful, because this movie is actually really good. It tells such a beautiful love story, the kind that gives me hope. The performances were freaking amazing, and the production design was fantastic. Also, I just gotta say it, Frida Pinto is like one of the most beautiful actresses to ever exist. Also, more movies should end with a specially choreographed dance sequence. Now, I'm about to go on a little rant, and the anger is not targeted towards this film, but rather the Academy. You see, my favorite film of all time also came out this year, WALL-E. And honestly, I think it should have been at least nominated for Best Picture. To quote the film critic Peter Travers, if there ever was a time where an animated feature deserved to be nominated for Best Picture, it's WALL-E. But the Academy hates animation, so there went that. Interestingly though, my point actually caused controversy, and because of that, the Academy nominated Up and Toy Story 3 for the next 2 consecutive years. But still, it's obvious what it was, and neither movies are on the level of WALL-E. I hope someday the Academy gives animation more respect, because now it seems that the films winning Best Animated Feature are films that actually deserve it. I hope they'll be brave enough to nominate an animated film that deserves it for Best Picture. But thanks for listening to my TED Talk.
I hurt myself today.
This movie really exposes the meaninglessness of war. It was a very real film for the time, and I understand why it won. Lots of great performances, and so realistic but still gritty looking. It was pretty bold to make a film about a war still taking place, and the suspense I felt throughout was so real. And I like that they follow a member of the bomb disposal squad, which is not something we often see in war films. But yeah, this film winning is a big deal because it's the first Best Picture winner to be directed by a woman. Oh, and I can't forget to mention the kitty cameo. Also, I didn't really like the ending, to be honest. It just felt a bit rushed. And now we're at the 2010s, And you see, you'd think this is a wild card, but the 2010s are actually probably one of the best decades in film, if you ask me. And the reason why is because films aren't that scared to speak out anymore. You know, there's all sorts of these taboo subjects which 50 years ago you couldn't make a film like this, but now people are less afraid to discuss these taboo but very real subjects. I mean, we got films talking about slavery, sexual abuse in the Catholic Church, sexual identity, class division, racism. Just, people are less scared to speak out about this. And I think that's why this is one of the best decades of film, period. So, while not on the level of Shakespeare and Crash, I often see people say that this was not the proper choice for Best Picture, and I agree. But not to discredit this film, I do think it's great and tells an interesting story from British history. I liked the performances and kinda wish we could have seen more of Timothy Spall as Winston Churchill. And the scene where he gives the speech is very breathtaking. But yeah, I don't really think this was the best choice for Best Picture, but I still think it's a fine film. So, remember when I said we wouldn't get a silent film until 2011? Here we are. I definitely think the judges fell for this one because of its nostalgic, gimmicky style, but I absolutely loved this. There were tons of passion and creativity put into this, like how when they added sound and how the ending had voices. The actors looked like they had a lot of fun due to the silent acting style. And overall, this was a really fun film. Now, before we move on, I want to state a weird fact about this film and the Oscars. It was backed by the monster Harvey Weinstein, and there was another Jean Dujardin film called The Players in which Weinstein ordered a scene to be cut involving two people making love during the 9/11 attacks, just so the chances of this film winning the award wouldn't be nixed. Yeah, it's a party in the CIA. I was very fascinated by this film's plot because, I mean, come on. Using a fake movie as a cover for rescuing hostages? That's crazy and makes for a fantastic film plot. Ben Affleck doesn't really get enough credit as an actor because he is good, for the most part. But he's also a really talented director. John Goodman and Alan Arkin were fantastic in this as well. Alan Arkin is probably one of my favorite actors, period. And I wouldn't say it exceeded my expectations, but it was still a good movie. And there's a kitty cameo. Oh my gosh, I knew this film would be depressing, but man, it breaks my heart knowing that so many people had to suffer through this. And a lot of the scenes were so brutal, but so realistic. Chiwetel Ejiofor was so amazing as Solomon Northup, and Lupita Nyong'o was amazing as Patsy. I was hoping for most of the movie that the slave owners would get what they deserved, but unfortunately they didn't because this isn't a fairy tale. I wouldn't even call the ending happy, more of bittersweet. Especially knowing that in real life, Northup disappeared, and to this day, no one knows what happened to him. But yeah, this movie is tough, but it's an important reminder of our dark history, but also shows that we can move on to a brighter future, as long as we don't repeat the mistakes of our ancestors. So, first things first, I loved the filming style of this movie. You don't see films made like this often, and that's really what made it stand out. All the performances were fantastic. Michael Keaton going through his washed-up midlife crisis, Zach Galifianakis, Edward Norton, and Emma Stone, who I absolutely adore. And yeah, I really like that film. I wouldn't call it the best, and that's not this film's fault because 3 of my all-time favorite movies came out this year, and it's like picking a favorite child. This was a really harrowing film, but a very important one nonetheless. The performances from all the leads were amazing and the soundtrack was cool. There's not much more to say about this film. It was great and something everyone should watch. This is a film I have so much adoration for, mainly because it just connects to me so much personally. It's so beautifully... Oh wait, what was that? Oops, sorry, I got it wrong. Moonlight won.
I'm only one step ahead of heartbreak.
I've heard nothing but great things about this film, and yeah, I see the hype. It tells a great story that not only black youth can relate to, but LGBTQ plus youth as well. The beginning act where Juan tells Chiron that there's nothing wrong with being gay made me tear up because so many young people figuring out their sexuality needs to hear a message like that. This is definitely a film I believe will save the lives of those who need to see it, and I'm glad it exists. And look, La La Land is one of my favorite films of all time, but I'm not really mad that this one won. Okay, I'm actually quite surprised that this won Best Picture because this isn't the norm for something that the Oscars would have picked. But I'm glad my boy Guillermo del Toro has an Oscar under his belt because he's probably one of the most creative filmmakers of all time. And this sure as heck was. It told such a beautiful love story about someone who's autistic. I mean a fish guy played by the wonderful Doug Jones. Daisy, if you happen to be watching this, you better cast him as St. Walker. Sally Hawkins did so much despite not speaking, and Michael Shannon is such an underrated actor. But yeah, this may not be my favorite film of 2017, and personally I think Get Out should have won Best Picture, but this is still a wonderful film. Oh, and who can forget about all the kitties? Just saying, Giles had a very calm reaction to seeing one of his cats get eaten, because if that was me, I probably would have gone into a murderous rage.
I am a building.
So this is another controversial Best Picture winner, and I enjoyed it, but really? Best Picture? My personal favorite film of the year is animated, so it didn't have a chance, but that would have been a much better choice in my opinion. I liked the chemistry between Mortensen and Ali, and the soundtrack was great, but this is the kind of film that the family from Get Out would say they loved. But hey, the winner could have been a lot worse, cause according to the voters, close behind this was Bohemian Rhapsody, so we dodged a bullet. But still, this film is average and forgettable at worst. Also, anytime Mortensen spoke, I kept on thinking about this.
Stay on your side!
Kid, you're pissed!
Stay on your side!
pissed.
It's not proper piece of etiquette!
What do you know about etiquette?
You're wrong, Mario! You're wrong!
I heard nothing but good things about this film, so I was heavily anticipating on checking it out. And it did not disappoint me at all. I avoided any plot details which ultimately caused the viewing experience to be much better. I was surprised a whole lot. This was probably one of the most suspenseful viewing experiences ever. I saw someone describe this as a horror film set in reality, and yeah, they're right. So if you haven't seen this, watch it. It lives up to the hype. And don't spoil anything for yourself, trust me. Oh, and there's a kitty cameo, although the dogs are definitely the show stealers. And now we're at the 2020s, and I'm sure you all know what I'm about to talk about. COVID. COVID did a huge number on the film industry. Stuff left and right was getting delayed, and because of this, we all moved to streaming, basically. Much like the people in the 50s discovering television. And of course, film has eventually started to come back, but it took a lot of little baby steps. And I think that what the 2020s represent, something that all the films have in common, is uncertainty. It's a lot of stuff that we just feel really uncertain about, especially all the Gen Zers like me out there. And a lot of these films represent them in some ways or others. Uncertainty in how we'll live. Uncertainty on our existence. Uncertainty on our passions. Uncertainty over if we have a future or not. And just, yeah, it's a very uncertain time for everyone right now. And that's really what this decade represents, if you ask me. So, I had mentioned about the oddities of this year, and I thought this film was okay. Not a masterpiece, but definitely not terrible. Frances McDormand is a very talented actress, and she had a very strong performance in this, because the Oscars had to make do with what they had. Personally, I would have picked Palm Springs. The only streaming original to win Best Picture, cinema was still in its weird recovery stage. And yeah, this was a film that definitely tugged on my heartstrings. I thought it was cool that the family were played by actual deaf actors. It really added to the authenticity. The music was great, and it told a beautiful story about family and love. Perhaps it wasn't the best movie of the year. Just be glad the winner wasn't Don't Look Up.
This is a life.
This is probably one of the greatest films of the 21st century, if not all time. Its story is one a lot of people, young and old, can really relate to. In spite of all that hopeless feeling that what we do doesn't matter, we can still make our lives matter. Amazing performances from everyone, my personal favorites being a tie between Michelle Yeoh and Ke Huy Quan. Quan especially knocked it out of the park considering it was his second American wide release in 30 years. Also, this is one of the most creative films of our time. I mean, so many of the stuff in this film I highly doubt other filmmakers could come up with. Nonetheless, have a studio approve it. Phenomenal themes on generational trauma, love, with a lot of fun. It'll make you laugh, it'll make you cry. Even though I already discussed this in my 2023 ranking, I'm happy to discuss it again. Christopher Nolan is one of our most talented filmmakers, and I'm glad he finally has a win under his belt. I wouldn't call this his magnum opus, but it's a close second. The best way to describe this film is a deconstruction of the great American hero archetype. It does such an exceptional job at showing Oppenheimer's regret in creating the bomb. All the characters are fleshed out so well, and the storytelling lens is so well done, along with Ludwig Göransson making a godly soundtrack. Along with this movie succeeding and getting under my skin, when someone asks where the post-credit scene is, I'll tell them that we're living in it. Probably one of the greatest films of our generation. Well, guys, I did it. I watched every single Best Picture winner, and I reviewed every single one. And that just leaves with one question. What to do with my life now?
Adios, au revoir,
Count 5.
get lost.
Get out! It's over.